We'll call to order the regular meeting of the Solvang City Council for February 8th, 2016. Will you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Deuce,
Here.
Jamison. Here. Skit,
Here.
Zimmerman,
Present.
Mayor Richardson.
Here. Pledge of Allegiance. Mrs. Jamison, would you lead us, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
City Manager's report.
Just two things, and they're reminders of events. One, the city offices will be closed on Monday for President's Day, February 15th, which happens to be my grandson's birthday also. Just not that he was a president. But and then second, just let people know that the West Coast Greyhounds will be back in town February 18th through the 20th.
Good.
This is the 12th year of that. They're one of the most thankful groups that comes. But rumor is this may be their last year. They're having their leader is retiring, and no one has stepped up. But so this may be your last chance to see the Greyhounds and the silver streak that they do. Yeah,
They're a great group of folks.
that's my report.
Thank you. Public communications, written or verbal. At this time, please direct comments to the City Council regarding consent calendar items or matters not on the agenda but within the jurisdiction of the Council. I have a speaker slip for Fred Koval.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council members, Fred Koval. Three things. Number one is, I looked and I presenting this to you, the 35-day weather forecast for Santa Barbara County. And on it, luckily, we have a 29th of February because that's the first possibility of rain. The lows are getting higher, the highs are getting higher. The first day of possible rain, a morning shower. Then the next day, 1 March, clouds and sun and a few showers. And then on March the 4th, a little afternoon rain. Second item. I've got in touch with Tom Fairham, Deputy Director for the county, water, Lake Kachuma. San Luis Obispo County, they're spending $445,000 to look at the possibility of dredging a lake up there in that county. Either dredging it or excavating it. I gave all the details to Tom Fairham, and he penciled it out and he said, we can't afford it. Well, I penciled it out, and this county could afford it. Double the size of the lake. Tom is the one that does a top-down of how much water's in the lake. Wrong. Dead wrong. The lake is filled up with sediment. The old number back from 50 years ago doesn't count anymore when the lake is full because they forget to deduct the bottom of the lake where there is no water anymore. I predict that there's going to be one hell of a fight if we don't get the Miracle March rains on two fronts. One is, will there be enough water from the northern Santa mountains in March? Doesn't look like there's going to be anything in February. And number two, will the city be able to supply the water? That's going to be the big issue. The third one is I forgot to bring the newspaper, but it's coming shortly here. My wife is bringing it, and it has to do with the latest sun.
Thank you, newspaper lady.
Sometimes I'm amazed. Other times I'm just blessed.
You're blessed she still loves you. Yes,
Well, sometimes. Anyway, page 7. That's for you. Page 7. Page 7 has to do with cannabis deliveries and the drivers. And what it says is that the drivers, they're vulnerable on two fronts. Number one, they got cannabis. And number two, they got money. It's a double hit. It's a free-for-all. So I hate to see another layer of problems heaped on this city by delivery of cannabis. When everybody knows you can go to the drugstore and you can get a prescription for cannabis colloid, which does the work without the buzz, without the THC, as the mayor has mentioned in the past.
Thank you, Fred. Esther, were you up for the first item? Would you please come up? Esther Bates?
Mayor Richardson, City Council members, staff, and audience. Well, it's been some time since I've been here and visited the chambers, but I'm here to bring some updates from the Elverhoy Museum of History and Art. I'm Esther Jacobson Bates. I'm the executive director, and it's my pleasure to be here. Earlier today, Elverhoy celebrated volunteerism with a luncheon for our team of more than 60 people. Their gift of time creates the warm and lively cultural center that is Elverhoy. And our volunteers learn, teach, raise funds, staff events and exhibits, keep up with the historic building and its grounds, make financial plans, and enjoy camaraderie. Their talents and energies maintain and improve the environment and quality of the museum, as well as the museum's services. And Elverhoy may operate on a limited budget in a monetary sense, but we have a wealth of talent and knowledge in our volunteers. And it's this wealth that makes our nonprofit a success. And I wanted to acknowledge that tonight in a public setting. On the horizon, we have some exciting programs and events. Tomorrow, I'm escorting a group of 24 people down to the Broad. That's LA's newest museum. And this is a sold-out trip to a very hot ticket location. And it's one of 5 excursions that we have, and they are collaborations with the Wildling and Buellton Rec. You might want to join us. Piedras Blancas is coming up in March, or maybe for the Pacific Asia Museum in May. And while some of ways 2015 seems like it's well behind us, many of the upcoming things we have going on at Elverhoy actually had their beginnings last year. One outcome is from the Cultural Frontrunners Conference, which was last March, and we have the establishment of a new series at Elverhoy, an occasional series called Danish Modern. Several of those events will take place soon, and one I'd like to, in particular to let you be aware of, and that it's on March 12th, on Sunday. We'll be hosting a performance with the world-renowned Copenhagen Girls Choir. That will be over at Bethania Church, and that's one of the events that's been facilitated by my contacts at the Danish Embassy as well as in Denmark. And like the boys' choir, they were here in 2012, I think it'll be a memorable experience for all ages. And I really consider these examples of very fine cultural exchanges between Denmark and Solvang that continue. And best of all, the event is also free. On Saturday, March 5th, I invite you and the community to join us for Sentinez Valley Museum Day. It'll be a day full of special activities, demonstrations, events, and it'll be open to all ages, and not just at Elverhoy, but at the Valley Museums throughout the area. And again, that's all offered free of charge. So I just wanted to let you know it's shaping up to be another active and exciting year at the museum. And I look forward to seeing you there as the year unfolds. And I'm going to leave this evening with a little handout for you, just telling you some of the highlights of our last year for you to look at your leisure. And since we have the sun there, so neatly delivered to you. If you open to the middle, you will see a nice article in there about our art exhibition that opened last weekend. So thank you, Fred, there for the publicity. And I'm also leaving a copy of our newsletter, which comes back from the printer and should be in your mailboxes at the end of the week, but I'll give you a sneak preview. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther. Tracy Farhad.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council members, staff, and audience. Tracy Farhad, Solvang CVB, doing my tourism update a little early this month as I will be away at the end of the month at another trade show event. Just wanted to give you a little insight into our latest sales efforts on behalf of the city. Greg Corso, our sales representative, and myself went to Atlanta for 4 days to attend the National Tour Association's annual convention. There were over 3,000 tour operators that were gathered there. We had 28 appointments over the course of 2.5 days. It's speed dating, so you basically sit down and you've got 12 minutes to impress them and tell them what they want to hear, and then hope that they'll do something about it and come back to you later. We were excited to know that there were at least 3 requests for proposals that were on site, so during the appointments. It's nice to be able to follow up on that in the during your lunch hour. And they range from a 3-night Christmas time group coming to a large organization bringing for 2-night stays over 25 dates going up into the next year. And they are planning for 2017 and 18 already. I wanted to let you know I did meet with one Chinese tour operator who let us know that they were coming through, but they were only spending about an hour. And is it possible to have a step-on guide so that they could learn more about our heritage? And when we were able to tell them about our historic walking tour and our step-on guides, and they said we didn't need translators, they would do that. He said, quote, "Now I know why my groups must spend the night." And that is why we do this. So we're pretty excited. Our next one coming up, I'll be in Alaska in February. You're more than welcome to join me at the Go West Conference, another speed dating opportunity for the 13 Western states. We'll be taking our top 10 must-see-do for Solvang in Mandarin for an easier hello back and forth with those appointments. Also wanted to let you know, Taste of Solvang tickets are on sale. We've got some great new events, Sip and Savor. That's the new opening night. It's really good for locals. Please join us. Also the new Sunday Bubbles, Brews, and Brunch. So we'll be having a special martini bar, or anyway, it's going to be done by Chef Pink, who's part of the bar. Yes, thank you. And just because I know, because I personally called around to ask, because I had friends who wanted to come up here on Valentine's weekend, we are completely sold out. So it's nice to know everyone's going to be enjoying their holiday with us here in Solvang. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. I have no other speaker slips. Does anyone else wish to speak at this time? Seeing one, we'll come back to the council for council comments. Would you like to start, Mrs. Jameson?
Well, first, I would like to recommend to Mayor Richardson, if he still has the quilt that you bought at a Greyhound dinner.
I auctioned it off at their last meeting.
Oh, you did? So who has it now?
Somebody from the Greyhound.
Oh, shoot, we can't put it up in City Hall then. Okay, all right.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. I was just going to say it would be nice to put it up in City Hall. That's fine. And then the chamber dinner last week was delightful. It was very nice to see many people, Tracy being one, honored. And this guy sitting right here. I don't know if it was honoring him or not, but it was more like a roast. But there were many people in the community that were recognized, and I thought it was a very nice function. A lot of people. Mr. Deuce's chandeliers, his light fixtures are beautiful. They're worth a walk by and take a look in the banquet room. They are gorgeous. And then I have an announcement about a movie A documentary that's being presented by Purple Star Veterans and Families. And that is John Henry Parker. He's the co-founder of that organization. It's going to be shown on Saturday at the Libero. It's going to be free to any veteran that would like to come and their families. And it's called Thank You for Your Service. And it's a series of interviews of all kinds of people that were have been involved in the defense of America. That's the best way to put it. But I would encourage you to go down. It's at 2 o'clock, February 13th at the Libero Theater. So I would get there a little bit early if you want to get a ticket.
Thank you. Mr. Deuce.
Excuse me, no comment tonight.
Mr. Skid.
I just want to back up the comments that Councilwoman Jameson made about the chamber dinner. It was a very good dinner, very enjoyable evening on that one there. Other comment is Tracy mentioned Bacon and Brine, and I'm going to do a plug for them because they have come up with a glazed donut with bacon on it. Absolutely killer, fantastic. It's caramel and bacon and, very gooey, but very good. You can't go wrong. It's got the basic food groups, bacon, sugar, and lard. That's great. But then the last comment is in regards to water. If you've been following the Kachuma Lake, it has actually come up about 9 inches over the last couple of weeks, but it's 9 inches at its current state is not really a heck of a lot. And if we do not get any rain or appreciable rain for it to come up a whole bunch, as Fred was mentioning, it's going to be a very nasty year. The water level is getting down to the point where it is in the old river channel. And this summer, if it hasn't come up a whole bunch, it's going to go down real quick, real fast. And Mr. Koval is right. There is going to be a major conflict between water users on the south coast trying to get as much water out of as they can, and the valley and the Santa Maria users trying to get their allotments. So it's going to be kind of nasty to get. And I see we have Mr. Wales in the audience tonight. He's going to give us another item here, and he can probably give us, if we ask very nice, he might be able to give us an update on the water status of Kachuma. But that's my comment for tonight.
Mr. Zimmerman.
No comment.
I'd like to reiterate Mr. Skid's and Mrs. Jameson's comments about the Chamber of Commerce award banquet. I think that if it's in any indication, that was probably the most well-attended Chamber of Commerce function that I've seen since I've lived here, and it bodes good for the rest of the city with the participation by everyone. I want to congratulate the winners of the awards, Mr. Vidro and Tracy and Esther. You didn't win anything. You should have. Those are the end of my comments.
Mr. Mayor, I
Yes.
just have a question to ask Mr. Koval. What lake are they going to dredge out? Lopez?
Actually, it's a little-known lake. I think it's Murray. It's
Oh,
a
okay.
little-known lake that's filled almost to the top.
Because if they dig out Lopez, maybe they'll find all the equipment that's buried there when the big rains came and they couldn't get it out.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
But it's interesting the numbers that they want to spend just for the engineering study, let alone dredging.
Thank you.
Next is approval of the agenda as presented. Is there any changes to the agenda anybody wants to make? Okay, on we go to the council minutes. I have a speaker's slip from Mr. Koval to speak at that. Would you like to talk now before we talk about it, Fred?
Oh, this is associated with
Draft agenda approval?
Yes. The reason I bring up the agenda approval is that when you go to page 3 of 5, and you take a look at about halfway down, after further discussion, including and it's associated with if it goes below, the discussion was if you go below 12.5%, you might want to put the penalties back in.
Fred, are you talking about, you're on the minutes? Well, they're on agenda approval right now.
Oh, excuse me. Yeah, oh, you're on 3.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry?
You're on 3?
We're on 4.
Oh, did you? I thought you were still on 3. I thought you
No,
said-
I
okay.
just passed it over because there's no
Sorry,
changes.
Fred.
I didn't have to make a motion.
Okay,
On to 4.
sorry, Fred.
Okay, and then when Councilman Zimmerman made another substitute motion, and then at the very bottom, you passed the substitute motion. There's no indication in there that you still held to the 12.5%.
I didn't
They didn't.
get rid of it.
Okay, so with that in mind, in the flyer that came out, you mentioned the 12.5%, the flyer addition to the water bill. I think that was an error.
Yeah, the flyer was printed and ready based on the first action of the council. Yeah, and in the bill insert.
Okay, the other, so I appreciate if you maybe update that somewhere in, when you put the bill. The other issue is, I don't know how you picked 12.5%. I mean, the mandate through October of this year is clearly from the governor, 25%. So I think the city is subject to potential fines if they, although I'm hearing no, I hear a shaking ahead.
Yeah, no, the city's not an urban water supplier.
Right.
So that mandate and the potential of fines doesn't apply to the city. What applies to the city is that we have to have rules regarding watering, et cetera, and those are all still in place.
But we don't have to, we can ignore the 25% mandate?
Not if you don't want penalties.
No,
See, that's
we
my
aren't-
issue.
We aren't subject to penalty.
No, we aren't, but they are if they don't, that was the object of our original drought declaration, was that there would be penalties involved. And we because we eliminated the penalties and raised the rates, we're trusting the users to keep the conservation efforts in effect. If they don't, we're going to go back, we're going to consider going back instead of automatically. We're going to consider going back to putting
Right.
penalties on the rates.
Yes, okay.
Okay,
But
because
when I,
the users have shown great fortitude
I-
and really good about the conservation. We don't expect to go back on penalties because they have been handled it so well.
yeah, I'll bring a video of a drone that went up 500 feet over my property and shows you exactly just how many things died on my property.
Oh, yeah,
Mostly all of it.
You're not alone, believe me.
Yeah, okay. However, when I go to Stage 2 drought and state regulations, and this was on page 4 of 7 of the January 11th meeting, and the code is there in black and white. Water Code 1058.5.
We don't have copies of that.
Anyway, when I read that, I respectfully disagree. It's still 25%. So it might take some research. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Fred. Are there any additions, corrections, or deletions to the minutes of January 25th? Seeing none, can I have a motion accepting the minutes?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Oppose, abstain, pass. Item number 5. The consent agenda. Does anybody want to pull any of the items off the consent calendar?
I just have a question about one of them.
Which one is that?
Okay, let me look here. Audit survey, excuse me.
Which item? Should- 'cause,
D,
D, would you
D.
read D, please? 5D. Would you read the item? 5,
Regis D. Consent item 5D, approve and authorize the mayor to execute an amendment to the contract for audit services with Terry Krieg, CPA, at an annual cost of $29,850.
your questions.
okay, my question is, Terry has been doing our audit since 2005, 2006, is that correct? Okay. When I sat on local school boards, I don't know if it's mandatory, but we always changed our auditor periodically. Is that not something that municipalities have to do?
It's not mandatory, probably isn't mandatory for school districts either, but
Or just good practice?
That's, a lot of people think it's good practice to
Yeah.
change auditors.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we were legal. Thank you.
Is there any other comments or questions on the consent agenda? If not, can I have a motion accepting the consent calendar?
I'll move, we accept.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. Would you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Deuce?
Yes.
Jameson? Skip?
Yes.
Zimmerman?
Yes.
Mayor Richardson?
Yes, that's a pass. On to the regular agenda, item 6.
Item 6, 2014-15 Comprehensive Annual Financial Report.
Staff report?
Good evening, Mayor, council members. Sandra Featherston, your Administrative Services Director. Tonight, our recommendation is that you accept, and the record is presented, our comprehensive annual financial report, also known as the CAFR. And we're also going to review the ending fund balances for the fiscal year that ended June 30, 2015. Our auditor, Terry Krieg, is here, and he will also provide some information related to our CAFR at the end of my discussion. Every year, we do an annual audit, and we prepare the comprehensive annual financial report. That includes notes and the financial statements that are prepared by the auditor, and then the staff prepare all of the schedules and the management discussion and analysis. We did not have any significant or unusual transactions other than the ones that he identified on the staff report. Those include, we had an overall 1.69 million increase in the city's overall net position, and that was a result of the total revenues for the city exceeding 2015 expenses. So we had an increase to our overall net position. About 1.1 million of that is generated by governmental type activities, and those in the business type activities, which are typically the enterprise funds, reported an overall net increase of about 595,000. The business type funds collectively reported a $106,000 increase in the overall cash position, and this was net of the $609,000 cash decrease in the water fund. The cash decrease in the water fund resulted from repayment of the interfund loan, higher operating payments, and capital improvement costs. The city's general fund generated about $1,076,000 more in revenues than expenditures in 2015, and we ended with a positive $8.63 million fund balance. And I'll discuss that in a little bit more in detail. There was a $157,000 decrease in the fund balance of the impact fee fund as a result of the cash outflows for the affordable housing assistance. You might remember that payment for the senior apartment complex earlier in the year. And our internal service fund ended up with about 1.1 million in cash available for future capital asset needs. We are not subject to the Single Audit Act because we do not receive federal funds in excess of 500,000. And next year, it'll be nice because we're right on the border there, but next year that increase is going to go to 750,000, and I don't anticipate that. If we were subject to the Single Audit Act requirement, it would just involve a whole nother set of documents that would need to be prepared by Terry. At our meeting in October 2015, I did go over the current fund balances of the general fund and talked about the overall balance of 8.6 million. You can see from the table in the staff report that we have an unassigned amount of about 4.8 million. And if you recall, council is going to use about 750,000 of that for Table A water going forward in 16-17. We also have amounts identified for 15-16. We had amounts set aside for emergencies of about 3.3 million. And our reserve fund policy states that our balance needs to be 50%. And so each year as we go into the next year, we update that amount and we will designate a certain amount for reserves according to our projected expenditures for the next fiscal year. With that 4.8 million that's unassigned, I'll be coming to you probably over the next coming year with possibilities for, again, reducing our OPEB liability. And we're going to talk about putting some of that money into a trust later tonight, as well as paying down our unfunded pension liability with CalPERS as well. And as I mentioned, we are going to use some of that money to pay for that Table A suspended water. The enterprise funds for 14-15 all showed a slight increase to their overall fund balance, and as I've mentioned on numerous occasions, the water fund is the one that we tend to be the most concerned about. There was a slight increase in the water fund, primarily due to capital contributions, which represents the connection fees that are going on at Skip Mesa. The water fund does have an unrestricted net position of about $2.39 million at the end of June 30. However, we also know that we're going to spend, after updating the latest budget adjustments, about $2 million in the water fund. So that would leave us with about $390,000 available. I did identify that we, as the mayor has mentioned, the city has done a great job of conserving water. And even with the penalty structures, though, we did not generate a big increase in revenue. So that is going to be something to think about going forward. And I'd like to introduce Terry Krieg, our city auditor, and he's going to talk a little bit more about the CAFR overall and answer any questions, and then I'll come back if you have any questions.
Terry? Welcome back.
Well, thank you, and
See you
good
again.
evening. Gee, Sandra kind of took the wind out of my what I was going to say here, but I'll kind of try to make it so that I don't go repeating too much of what she had to say. The good news is it was a beautiful day to drive down here from Santa Rosa, which is north of San Francisco. It was like, I think, 83 around San Luis Obispo when I went through. Really a nice day. Anyway, thank you for inviting me here to present to you your June 30, 2015 audited financial statements. I have completed the audit of your 2015 financial statements and have expressed an independent accountant's opinion that your financial statements do present fairly the financial position of the city's governmental activities, its business type activities, its major funds, and its aggregate other funds, all in conformity with accounting principles generally accepted in the United States of America. This year there is a section in my report, it's called Emphasis of a Matter, where I point out that the city did in fiscal 2015 adopt the new Financial Accounting Standards Board Statement number 68, which is prescribing new accounting and financial reporting practices in regard to public employee retirement systems. There's a significant matter on your overall statement in that position that wasn't there in previous years, and I'll talk a little bit later about that. As you know, the document before you, this comprehensive annual report, has several sections: an introductory section, the financial section, which contains my independent auditor's report, the management discussion and analysis section, the basic financial statements, and the notes. There are some additional required supplemental information, which is a budget to actual statement. Also, there's a couple of new schedules this year as part of the implementation of this new pension accounting and reporting standard. One has to do with the display of the amount of contributions, employer contributions, that the city made in fiscal, in the plan year ending June 30, 14. And also information on the city's proportionate share of this new pension liability, which is referred to as the net pension liability. And then some optional information in the statistical section. I think on an overall basis, what surfaces in your June 30, 15 financial statements is the city on an overall basis financially did very well. Your net position did increase, as Sandra was saying, about $1.7 million in the government-wide financial statements. Your governmental activities, that is your, so to speak, your general fund and all your other funds, excluding the water and the wastewater and the transit funds, actually generated about $1.1 million a net gain in terms of operations. And a good portion of it had to do with the strength of your TOT revenues in the last fiscal year. They seem to keep going up significantly each year, which is a good sign of sort of a recovering economy to the extent that it's benefiting the city with increased revenues. Your business type activities reported a gain of about $595,000 on a combined basis. I think that the traditional setting of financial reporting for cities is the fund statements, and you'll find those on pages 33 through 40. And as Sandra mentioned, your general fund did end fiscal 15 with a fund balance of about $8.6 million, which is a healthy fund balance for a city of your size. Your impact fee fund actually did go down because of the spending that Sandra mentioned, and your other governmental funds, gas tax and some other smaller funds, ended the year with about $569,000 in fund balances. The water fund, on a cash basis, ended 2015 with about $2.5 million in cash, and the wastewater fund ended the year with about $3.9 million in cash. There is somewhat of an issue in these two business-type funds. Both the water and the wastewater funds actually reported operating losses in fiscal 15, with a operating loss of $343,000 in the water enterprise and $188,000 loss in the wastewater fund. When it was all said and done, those funds actually did show a profit, but the profit is, you have to kind of take a close look at that profit. That profit is there because of these capital connection fees that came in fiscal 15. I can't remember the exact numbers, but maybe $400,000 in one fund and $300,000 in another. The main point to consider there and keep in the back of your mind is that those are one-time inflows of resources. And if there's no permitting in subsequent years, then they go away. And you're going to start seeing the loss be a recurring issue in those funds unless the rate structure is changed or unless the cost side is decreased. Your transit fund did end the year with about $737,000 in cash and had another $223,000 set aside for restricted for capital replacements, which was restricted by the nature of the allocation of the funds. And you have this other additional fund, this internal service fund. It was healthy. It ended the year with about $1.1 million in cash. And of course, the notes to the financial statements disclose the city's accounting policies that are used by the city to prepare the financial statements. On an overall combined basis, the city of Solvang ended fiscal 15 with about $19.6 million in cash and investments with which to operate. The big change that is in these financial statements for 2015 that has not been there before is the recording of what is called the net pension liability. And what that number, that number is quite large. It's a $2.5 million obligation that shows up in your statement of a net position. That number was provided by PERS, the Public Employees Retirement System, and part of a actuarial study of the PERS plan in the sky, so to speak. And when I say that, I mean that the city of Solvang is a member of the PERS cost-sharing pool. So this number that comes down to the city of Solvang to use for financial reporting is, so to speak, the city's proportionate share of the net pension obligation of all of the members in the pool. And I think the pool that you're in has over 1,200 members, and the total net pension liability is over a couple $2 billion. So it's an allocation is what it boils down to, and it's an actuarial-based number based on mortality rates, the number of employees, the length of employment, and also the investment rate of return. And probably the more important thing to consider, to keep in the back of your mind, is I think on page 56, there is what they call a sensitivity analysis, which is an additional disclosure. And what's, I think, interesting there is what they're saying is if the interest rate or the rate of return on the plan's investments varies by plus 1% or minus 1%, this liability can swing up 1.6 million more than it is this year, or swing down basically $1.5 million. So that number is a departure from the previous concept of recording historical cost numbers in your financial statements. That's pretty much it in terms of my presentation of your June 30, 2015 financial statements. I have provided you with additional reports, a letter to those charged with governance, where I discussed the normal conduct of the audit and whether or not I had any significant issues. I did not. You have a very fine finance director and good staff, and I had no particular significant problems.
Thank you, Terry. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much, Terry. Well, let me get my mind straight. The retirement funding, you said was $3.5 million now.
It's roughly $2.5 million now, yes.
$2.5 million now, and it could vary over time?
Well, there's a sensitivity analysis because it's an actuarial model, and if they've used this assumption that the rate of return is going to be 7.5%, but they've also disclosed that if it varies by just 1 percentage point, it can double up or go down by 50%.
And is that every year if it does that, or is it just one time?
No, well, we don't know what's going to happen. This year was the year of implementation. So we'll kind of have to wait and see how in reality this plays out going down the road in terms of financial reporting.
And this is the fund that we plan on prepaying to get that balance down? Is that the
No,
one?
I don't think it is. I think you're talking about your retiree medical plan, which is a different animal.
Okay.
But that's going to get complex too, because the Government Accounting Standards Board is changing the financial reporting requirement for your retiree medical to, I think, align it with the same type of actuarial concepts that's being used with this public employees pension plan. So it's going to get a little muddied here for the next year or two with all these changes using these actuarial models to book numbers into your financial reports.
This is an aside. The 7.5% return that they're expecting, that's an unreasonable return, isn't it?
Well, they say it's reasonable based on their actuarial model and their studies. I mean, as a layman, I would go like, what? But, I'm not an actuary, so.
I have no other questions. Any more? No. Thank you very much, Terry.
Sure, you're very welcome.
So that concludes my staff report. I'm also available if you have any questions.
Do you have any questions of Sandra? Seeing none, thank you, Sandra. Then we'll go to the public for comment. Fred Koval.
I'd like to call your attention to Sandra's report, page 3 of 4. And in it, just one minor little thing, just doing a little math. There's 2 tables there. First table is funds 500, 501, 502, and then it's repeated again, and some different numbers. I don't know if it makes any difference, but when you look at the first table, the 502 account, it says 296,371. When I did the math on all the other ones, and by deductive reasoning, there should be brackets around that 296,371.
Yeah.
Again, I don't know if that
I've got
has
that
any
noted in mind
effect.
too. I was going to bring that to her attention, that it was misprint.
Oh, a misprint.
Well, it has to
Oh,
be.
all right.
Thank you, Fred. Are there any other comments? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the council for action. Does anybody have any comments, wants to make a discussion? Well, with that, can I have a motion accepting the staff's recommendation?
So move.
Is there a second? It's been moved and seconded. Will you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Deuce,
Yes.
Skid,
Yes.
Jameson,
Yes.
Zimmerman,
Yes.
Mayor Richardson.
Yes. That was passed with a 5-0. Item number 7.
Item 7, San Ynez River Water Conservation District groundwater sustainability presentation.
There's a stranger.
Here we go again.
How you doing, Bruce?
Talk about water.
It's good to see you.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, City Council members, citizens of Solvang and the San Ynez Valley, I'd like to say good evening and thank you for the opportunity to talk about the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act of 2014. What became the law was actually a consolidation of a number of different acts. The law became effective January 1, 2015. That's 13 months ago, so you might ask yourself, what has been going on for the last year? One of the principal activities has been that DWR has been busy developing and implementing regulations to implement the act, including making certain determinations about priorities in basins and basin boundaries and such. Where I wanted to start was basically what brought about the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. And it was a combination of a number of different factors. First, the current drought, which may in fact set a new record for the drought record compared to, say, 1949 to 51, I think it was. Statewide attention to wells running dry and subsidence, principally in the Central Valley. And in this particular instance, major groups, including the California Water Foundation and the Association of California Water Agencies, were supporting the administration in developing their own sets of regulations to move forward. And so California, having been the only western state without management and regulation of groundwater, wound up with a set of regulations. Attempts to make these regulations is not new. In the last 30 or 40 years, there's been 2 or 3 instances when the state tried to develop groundwater management and regulation. The last was AB 3030 about 20 years ago, and in fact, we had considerable experience in the San Ynez Valley with that particular set of laws. Moving on, I think we have to figure out, first of all, where and how the act will be applied. And it is mandatory in groundwater basins that the Department of Water Resources describes in Bulletin 118 and defines their bounds, providing those basins are classified as either medium or high priority. Bulletin 118 actually describes a basin called the Santa Ynez Valley Groundwater Basin, which is one basin for the entire watershed. I call it the SY Basin. The SY Basin is medium priority. That was based on a number of different criteria. Those criteria include the population in the basin, the number of public and private water wells, the amount of irrigated agriculture, the overall reliance on groundwater as a primary source, and any particular negative impacts, those being overdraft, water quality degradation, and surface water connectivity issues. I suspect most people are somewhat familiar with the concepts of overdraft and bad water quality. Surface water connectivity refers to the interaction between groundwater in the uplands and water flowing in the areas of known and defined channels in riverbeds. And we'll have more to say about that because it affects this area. Now, where was the pointer we were going to use? Oh, okay. Turn the thing on.
So we want to do that. That's the
Oh,
red one,
just
it's
press
just
the
top
button.
button.
Press-
That's a flashlight at the top.
Oh, okay, there we go. Okay, so what comes across as brown areas here are areas of high priority. And as you can see, they're primarily in the Central Valley and in Southern California, and a few places along the coast. Notably, we are right in this area, near Point Conception. The high priority basin is Santa Maria, which however has been adjudicated, so they kind of get off light with this new act. They've already experienced their pain and settled a lot of issues. We are right in here, kind of the yellow color, adjacent to the San Antonio groundwater basin to our north, And the southern part of that yellow line is the San Ynez Valley groundwater basin. It's one of 127 basins that have to be regulated under the Act. Moving on, it's very important to realize that SGMA only applies to percolating groundwater. That is groundwater under the uplands that originates primarily from recharge associated with rainfall and that sort of thing, as opposed to water flowing in a known and defined channel, such as that involving surface water and underflow in rivers and streams. And we'll be making that point repeatedly throughout the evening. The state, once again, has said it is best that these new regulations be applied and accomplished locally. However, the state's primary role that they see is to provide guidance, technical support, and set forth interim measures when local agencies don't achieve a more sustainable future. This is why I call SGMA AB 3030 with teeth, because this time they mean it in our definitive procedures defining what happens if you don't comply with the law. Now, this is what we can refer to as the SYV basin by portion. So DWR sees basically 3 portions for the overall groundwater basin going from Santa Ynez to Surf. First, we have the western portion of the basin, which is the Lompoc area basins, the central portion, which is the Buellton Basin, and finally, the eastern portion, which we know as the Santa Ynez Uplands, and Solvang lives right there in the extreme southwest corner on the edge of, according to DWR, of the Santa Ynez Upland Basin. So the 3 colors there, the area that represents, is what is the subject of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. Now, the yellow line all the way from Kachuma to Lompoc is the surface water, but more importantly, the underflow associated with the river. That water is not subject to Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. That's the good news. Of course, the bad news is it's been regulated for over 100 years by the State Water Board directly, as you folks know only too well, relative to permit 15878, I believe it is. The other part of this map is what I'll call the uncolored portion. For a good reason, I'm not referring to what is white as white. I'll call it uncolored. That's basically bedrock, where you may have hard rock wells, but they don't produce high amounts of groundwater, and those areas are little affected by this. So, moving on.
Bruce?
Yes.
Since the Solvang is on the border of that basin, could there be a mistake in mapping? And if there isn't a mistake, is there an advantage to Solvang being in that management or not?
Well, when we get to another map later on, the district mapped that same area as bedrock. And so you're correct.
That's
I
my
mean,
point.
DWR's maps are based on a scale of 1 to 250,000. And so there could very well be differences between analyses. And while the geology may not have changed for 10,000 years, the knowledge of it has, and it's becoming increasingly more evident, particularly with the city of Solvang implementing an upland well drilling program. What's come to light, I think, through Matt's efforts is an awareness of the complexity of the area that Solvang happens to be over in terms of folding and faulting interlayers of alluvial material that produce groundwater in kind of like what is a sieve kind of location where water drains from the upland to the river under and along the tributaries in the upland to the river. And in fact, I wanted to point out, and to further the answer to your question, if you go here to Buellton, there's a big area here where there's direct contact between the Buellton upland and the river. You come to Santa Ynez, there's an area between Solvang and about the end of the district boundary there where the hydrogeology is extremely complex. And that has to be sorted out. And we have two opportunities to sort that out and redraw boundaries. One is now, in which case you would spend a lot of money immediately. The other time is later, when you're actually doing detailed studies of the groundwater basin in connection with a sustainability plan. Then you have the opportunity, you're spending the money anyway, that will be the time to basically figure out the boundaries of the basin.
Well, is there an advantage to being in the basin or not?
That depends on where we're going next relative to,
It depends.
let's put it this way. If we look at this act, or these laws, the hydrogeology is the stage. Okay, we're going to have a theatrical production here. The script is the wall. We need one more thing to make all this work. You need the actors. And we all know there are good actors and bad actors and all kinds of actors. And so the first challenge, which we'll get to in a few minutes, is how the parties interact to develop a sustainable groundwater management plan.
Thank you for that.
So the answer to your question will evolve in increments as we move along.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, now, what does sustainability mean? Next one. Okay, sustainability means a maximum water use over time without causing an undesirable result. Well, whoop-de-doo, what's an undesirable result? There's actually 6 of them. And the first 3 are the ones we need to be concerned about. The first one is chronic lowering of groundwater levels, indicating a significant and unreasonable depletion of supply if continued. Now, back in as early or late ago as 87 to 91, we thought we were at all-time lows in some of the upland groundwater basins. From 91 into the early 2000s, there was a substantial amount of recharge and all the basins recovered. Now we're hitting lows again like we saw back in 87 to 91 or even worse. Now if you go through that, if you go through continued cycles of that and the peaks when the basin is full are all at the same level, then you've got sustainability. But if the peaks, when it fills back up again, are successively getting lower and lower, that's what I believe, when the regulations are written, you will see a significant and unreasonable depletion of a water supply. And this is somewhat different than the more common definition of so-called overdraft. And you can observe 5 hydrogeologists in a room trying to determine whether a basin is in overdraft. The first thing they spend considerable amount of time on is coming up with a 30-year or so representative period. Then they determine a water balance for that and figure out supply versus demand. That's a little different concept than this concept, and it's going to be interesting to see how the regulations evolve. The second one that we're going to be dealing with is groundwater depletions that have a significant and unreasonable adverse impact on surface water. So, if the players in the uplands, say that Santa Ynez uplands, are pumping down that basin so that it diminishes stream flow, which would otherwise wind up in the river, that's a problem. In the Buellton area, 20 years ago, there was a determination of about 2,000 acre-feet exchange between the upland and the river. It was determined to be positive at that time, and the basin was determined to be in surplus. That was 20 years ago. All that is going to have to be revisited. Relative to Solvang, you're sitting right on top of, as I said before, a very complex hydrogeologic area that's kind of like a filter or sieve with water moving from north to south toward the river. And the folks in the rest of the basin can impact you far more than you can impact them. And therefore, you might want to be in the best possible advantage to talk to those folks. The third item on here is significant unreasonable reduction in water quality. That we think of as nitrogen problems in areas of shallow groundwater with septic systems and/or certain agricultural areas. There's a limited amount of that in the San Ynez Uplands Basin. So when these things are taken into account, a plan ultimately will need to be developed, and we need the players in my theatrical production now to come up with a groundwater management plan. So how are the players going to relate to one another? And that is what is shown here. There's one possible exception. There's no single agency now that could form a sustainable groundwater management agency, or GSA, in the San Ynez Valley. But a GSA must be formed in the basin to implement SGMA. The GSA or GSAs must be public entity or a group of public agencies, and a new agency will need to be developed based on a joint powers authority or an MOU or other legal agreement. And the law allows for a number of different possibilities here. Allows for one basin with one GSA. That means all the way from San Ynez to Surf. That doesn't seem very practical. Another is to have a single plan for that area, but have multiple management areas developing and contributing to one overall plan. We'll see as we move forward, that's not particularly desirable either. The third one, and the one we kind of like right now, is to have multiple plans formed by multiple GSAs. And in that context, if that happens, then there has to be coordination between those GSAs in terms of common methods, common criteria, and an overall sustainability in the different portions to demonstrate sustainability in the entire basin. So here it is, February of 2016. The regulations on GSAs are being written now. They will go into place June 1, 2016, and it will be 13 months between then and June 30th, 2017 for a GSA to be formed, or some scheme representing GSAs. Now, the one I left out here, let's go back a second, is a zinger, and the counties are responsible for white areas. Okay, so there's a regulatory definition of white. That's why I didn't want to call white white before I called it uncolored. No, in a minute. So we're going to have to look and see what areas are not covered by an appropriate water agency or land planning agency, because if that's the case, then the county is expected and anticipated to be, depending on a number of circumstances, the GSA and be responsible for that area. We're going to get back to the maps in a second. Now, let's go next one. So a plan needs to be developed. Since we aren't in critical overdraft, we have until 2022 to develop a plan. There's a definitive process to do that, including lots of public hearings, must solicit and consider input from a variety of stakeholders. I could bring a list, but it includes everybody you could dream of, so I didn't bring the list. And finally, I want to make the point that in some instances it's early because the regs are evolving and clarifying questions pertaining to how the law will be interpreted and implemented. Very quickly, some of the powers and authorities of this new entity, the GSA, are certain things that a lot of folks in the valley, at least in the San Ynez River Water Conservation District, are familiar with. Registration of wells, measurement devices, which every municipal entity has, annual, or in our case, 6-month statements of diversion, extractions as a basis for fees that may be tiered pricing. All of those exist already through our district. The more interesting one comes here in item 3, controlled groundwater extractions, but pumping allocations are not a final determination of water rights. There can be transfers of pumping allocations between pumpers. And the act does not change water rights or priorities. So it's kind of hard to envision how, when you have a right and the supply is going to be managed, that there's not an interaction between those two things, but those are the words in the act. So, last slide with words compared to pictures. So we need to go back to the hammer that we talked about that is in this law but wasn't in AB 3030. First of all, if a basin, so if we don't act, the state will. And the last time they said that, but they never really did. This time, it's pretty clear the way the law is written and the fact that they're doing what they're doing and meeting their deadlines, that I think they're serious. And if there is no GSA on or before June 30th, 2017, the basin's declared probationary. There's no groundwater sustainability plan by January 31, 2022, you're probationary. And even after that date, if DWR, in consultation with the State Water Board, determines that the GSP is inadequate, then you're in a probationary situation. Now, the last bullet on here isn't a bullet, it's a diamond. I also thought about coloring that yellow, because that last statement is golden and very valuable, which is the State Board may exclude areas or portions of a basin that demonstrate compliance. That means if Lompoc is in compliance and Buellton isn't, that Buellton will be probationary, but Lompoc won't. And the same kind of thing applies relative to the upland basin. So now, very quickly, we're on the maps. This is the map you've seen before. Remember, white is without color, and the green area here is, from a regulatory standpoint, white. So our district covers, right here, partly consolidated bedrock and partly San Ynez uplands. That happens to be the historic bounds of Rancho San Fernando Rey, which wanted to be annexed and was annexed to the district. This is the eastern boundary of the main part of our district, which includes ID1 and Solvang right here. And I should say that pumping out here, we know to be minimal because we track it. The pumping in here has been up and down. This area of the basin was deemed to be deficient at one point in the 40s. That's why ID1 was formed. That's why our district took 10% allocation from Kachuma. So this area is managed because it has Kachuma yield, it has pumping from underflow below the dam, it has imported water. So there's 3 sources right there, and it has uplands groundwater from this area. Solvang can practice conjunctive use the river in times of plenty in terms of surface water, and use the uplands otherwise. Same thing for Buellton. So there's some semblance of management in all of these areas, but this white area out here is essentially unmanaged. It's in no water purveyors or water districts boundaries. So what the new law says is that the county is the presumptive manager of that area unless they decline. And they also have to accept by a certain date or it goes to the state. So given the history around here, I, for one, feel very strongly, and I happen to work here, but I live here. There needs to be, hopefully, a collective act of self-determination out there. The folks out there kind of get a choice. They can be managed and regulated by the county. They can be managed and regulated by the state. Or they could request to be annexed to the San Ynez River Water Conservation District. But in some way, the folks in the white area and in the district areas that are more managed in the white area have to figure out how to come together to form a groundwater sustainability agency to manage the San Ynez uplands.
Question. I know in a large portion of that green-white area, better, there's a number of small independent water companies that would have to be brought into the county somehow. But there's also in the green portion that Solvang is in, and even Buellton, there's some small independent water companies like Janet Acres has their own water system. I think Mesa Hills up behind Pat and Monty Roberts, they have their own water supply. Now, I'm assuming that in the ones that are within the general boundaries of San Ynez River Water Conservation District, they would have to be brought in. They would be under that regulation there. And then the ones that are in the green-white area, they would have to be brought into either one of your three things of either being managed by the state, managed by the county, or request annexation.
Right, or be managed by a combination GSA formed by the county, ID1 and Solvang, and our district. So it's kind of complicated. And it implies something involving potentially weighted voting, if you think about it, based on proportional interest and things like that. It's yet to be worked out.
So something which started off as looking like it wasn't going to be kind of a pain in the neck, but not that difficult, is now turning into something that's going to be a pain in the neck and very difficult.
I think if a GSA is formed and has an appropriate consultant, that after that point, it may not be, probably be less difficult than the first year, in my mind. Not so in some of these other areas. There's actually a lot of mutual water companies, and mutual water companies can be part, that was one of the amendments, of a GSA. In fact, there's 5 or 6 mutual water companies in the San Ynez uplands whose combined production equals that of the city of Buellton or Solvang. And I know that from a set of unfortunate circumstances, because some of them are affected by Chrome 6 and some aren't. The next picture simply is the same map that puts the names, and DWR does mention these areas by name, but does not call them basins, because again, we have one basin. And I just put that in there to make it more specific. It shows the same things as before. The final picture is more interesting because this is a comparison of DWR's one basin and the various basins individually and in total that the San Ynez River District identified, and this is very similar to what the county identifies. And so the colored areas are the areas where there's 100% agreement. And these kinds of areas with dots and stipple, those are the areas where there isn't agreement. And there are no areas where the local entities draw a basin and DWR does not. But there's lots of places where DWR draws a boundary and makes the basin bigger than the local entities. Some of these are a matter of detail, like up here. Some of them are a matter of more substance, like this entire area is considered the Lompoc area basins by DWR, but not by the local entities. It turns out that that entire area is covered by Vandenberg Air Force Base, and federal lands and federal entities can participate in SIGMA or not. And so relative to the Lompoc area, we're including in the beginning stages dialogue with the Air Force Base, because we actually want to promote their participation in cooperation, because among other things, we suspect they know more about this area out here than we do. Now, over here, this is our map where it shows Solvang sitting on bedrock. And that speaks to differing analyses in the complex area here. And if you were truly sitting on bedrock and drilled a bedrock well, and I suspect Matt knows this better than anyone, you're not going to get significant production. If you get yourself in a pocket of water-bearing material, unconsolidated material in this bedrock matrix, then you're going to get a well. So this area is pretty complex, and it's not, in my mind, financially feasible for anybody to sort that out until you're working, hopefully together, on more extensive studies to come up with the bounds of the basin, because that area is pretty complex for the entire area along the river there. So we can go on to one more set of words, which I call implications for Solvang's water supplies. First thing is that your State Water Board permit 15878 is not affected. Second thing is your state water allocation is not affected either. The third thing is your upland groundwater wells, your newest and smallest water source, is affected. And finally, any purchases you would make from ID1 will be partly indirectly affected, because their area over the uplands is substantial. And they could be practicing more conjunctive use now, for example, in terms of management, by using the uplands and not the river, because the river is dry, but they have some of their wells turned off because of Chrome 6. So that's something else, and that, to me, that's not progressive and significant degradation, because it wasn't man-caused, but still has to be dealt with. So at that point, I guess we're to the point to see if there are any more questions. Yeah, let's go back to the map.
Another question. This is really a minor one, but you were talking, I think, way back at the beginning of metering wells. I think it was way back on probably slide number 4 or 5. For these areas, say, how or what is the, or is this going to have to come out in discussion? But I know there's a number of wells that have been drilled that are now in production, that recently drilled wells that are going in for a lot of the vineyards, particularly in the Buellton upland area and the Santa Rita upland. But there's also been a number of wells that have been drilled, and then they were set up to be pumped, but they have not been developed. They have they're all set to be pumped. They haven't have not installed the pump and the assorted power to get water out of it. But the well is all set to go. The casing's been perforated. They've done a test pump on the wells. Now, how are those wells going to be? How are those wells going to be handled? Or is that something that's still up in the air? Nobody really knows.
So let's start in the beginning. To get a permit for a well anywhere in Santa Barbara County, and there may be exceptions in certain areas like cities and so on, you need a permit from Environmental Health Services, and that's purely focused on health and safety considerations, and it's a ministerial permit, so if you punch all the right buttons, you have to get the permit. when this act gets implemented by a sustainable groundwater management agency, it will, as it is said on one of the slides, get the determined spacing and whatever the other thing was around here. The county would have to tell the agency where wells were, and the agency could determine spacing and some other things. Now, you have to ask yourself, spacing requirements, and the county would have to forward the permit request to the agency before the action was taken, and the agency could impose spacing requirements. So right now, there's really no management control of the drilling of groundwater wells, just for health and safety purposes. Now, who puts in meters and who doesn't? I think that's the other place you were going. All municipal district water purveyors have meters as a matter of practical function. It's the only way you can figure out if you have leaks, and hopefully you have wellhead meters and you have meters at each customer's delivery point. The difference between the two involves lost water or meter calibration issues that have to be resolved. Theoretically, along the river, because of state board orders, particularly orders that came into being in the last 5 or 6 years, or more properly got noticed, wells are required along the San Ynez River by anyone pumping water in a known and defined channel. A lot of the people out there don't even know that, because there's been no outreach on behalf of the state board, but it's a requirement, and they're supposed to read their meters once a month, and every 3 years report monthly totals. That's out there now. A lot of the vineyards put in meters because they are very critical about water application and how little they can put on their grapes relative to the management of the grapes and the flavor of the wine and all of that. And then there are other people who will fight tooth and nail not to put in meters. But at the same time, a lot of agricultural interests are laboring under a burden that the most of us are not particularly aware of, called the Ag Order, where the Central Coast Water Board, in the interest of water quality, has been regulating water, if not water use directly, certainly application of fertilizer and nitrogen control and that sort of thing. So ag is more regulated now than it has ever been. And the first tangible outcome of all of this when it gets rolling, I think, is that everybody's going to have a meter.
Are there any other questions?
Yeah. Go ahead, or whoever
No,
wants
go
to
ahead.
Flip a coin.
Has anybody done any kind of extensive research on the basin using like any kind of sonar or electrodes to really map out the contours of the entire basin to know like where the real pockets are, not just kind of like test wells in random areas, but really identify the fine detail?
It varies depending on where you are in the basin. Traditional methods of measurement and monitoring exist to one degree or another, and prior and existing analyses are very variable as well. The Lompoc area basins were subject to a lot of controversy back in the 80s. There's a 26-year-old water level and water quality monitoring program down there. When you get to Buellton and Santa Ynez, the spacing of the wells, the available water quality data, the current analyses are a lot more limited. The Buellton Basin was subject to study in 1995 by a group of 5 hydrogeologists as part of a Buellton Upland Groundwater Management Plan, which was actually developed and approved by the district, the city of Buellton, and the principal mutual water company down there. Santa Ynez at that time experienced a certain amount of study, but the limitation was, and I don't think we realized at the time, that so much of the area was not in the district. And there is not a dense grid of monitoring in the San Ynez Uplands Basin, not like would be required under this law, in my view. There is enough density for the county to monitor in accordance with DWR requirements or the California statewide water elevation monitoring program, which does exist, but you can at the same time look at the spacing of wells in that program, which on a basin-wide basis may be adequate. But if my experience looking at one of these other basins, there was ample density of wells in the eastern half of the basin, but not in the west. And that was apparent 20 years ago, and it hasn't changed. So I guess the short answer to your, the long answer I just gave you, the short answer is probably no, I think.
Okay. And then with the fact that the upland water essentially flows to the river to some point, some level, right? Am I getting that right? It flow so the
Okay, first of all, I'm not a hydrogeologist.
Okay.
But I have read papers which make pretty clear, there's been a couple of papers at different locations in that complex zone. And I remember discussion 20 years ago of one of those little alluvial areas getting water or not getting water depending on the level of water nearby in the uplands basin. And if the water level was high enough to get over a subterranean little ridge in the ground, it flowed further south. And if it was lower than that, it didn't.
Right.
And it's even more complex than that.
Yeah, I see that could be an issue as far as accounting for that flow rate and, looking like we have a deficit in the uplands where it may appear that everyone's over pumping, but actually it's a loss in the river and it's underflow.
Yeah, I mean, even today, if you go to the park on the east end of San Ynez, just on the other side of the freeway, highway from the casino, that's where you will see flow in San Dakota Creek, because what comes out of the uplands basin, daylight's there, and it flows toward the river, and then the Chumash wastewater plant adds more to it, and there's a trickle all the way to the river. If you go to Nielsen's to go shopping, and you go and park on the highway side and look down into the creek, you'll see flow there. But if you go upstream or downstream, you won't see any flow, because it's a function of the bottom of the alluvial creek bed there as to whether the water pops to the surface or goes back down and moves underground, but it's headed toward the river.
Just to clarify, so in general, I mean, the upper portion, the green area there, is higher in elevation. Those are foothill areas. And in general, the groundwater does flow in the same direction as the surface flows towards the river. Although there could be lots of undulations of bedrock underneath pervious layers and so forth, but I think that was, I'm just trying to make sure I was getting the question.
Well, because of folding and faulting, the creek bed winds up cutting parts of the upland aquifer, and so it drains out.
Ms. Jamison?
How accurate are our records of actual wells that exist here in the San Ynez Valley? And the reason I ask that question is I have 3 clients that have wells on their property, and there's no record anywhere.
I'm sorry, I couldn't catch your question.
Okay, wells, how accurate are the records that we have regarding existing wells in the San Ynez Valley?
I mean, how, the measurement?
No, just that there is a well that exists on a piece of property. Because I have 3 clients that have wells on their property, and there's no record any place of those wells, and they are not that old.
That's entirely possible. And why? Well,
They just went and drilled?
pardon?
They just went in and drilled their own wells
Well,
without
they
permits?
I hope they have a ministerial permit from the county of Santa Barbara.
No.
Well, then they theoretically are in trouble. If they drilled a well without a county permit, that's not supposed to happen.
Well, I think it's happened a lot in the valley.
I think
Well,
if it's
that's interesting, you know. If there's lots of older wells that may or may not be totally known, in the sense that before, say, ID1 existed and there wasn't a purveyor water source, if you owned a property and lived in a house, you had a well. And then along came ID1 and served water. So some people picked up the ID1 water and kept their well, and some people just let their well sit there. Now, very few people legally abandon their well because that involves destruction, which costs many thousands of dollars. So,
So I guess my question is, what do we do about all of these unknown wells when we go in and start calculating how much water is being used?
well, that's going to be a challenge. I mean, theoretically, when a well driller drills a well, he is required to send a notice on a one-page form to the Department of Water Resources saying where, how deep, and what strata he penetrated and where he perforated the well in terms of where the water would come into the well. And as public entities, we have been able to get those if we filed the appropriate paperwork and paid the amount of fee and waited as long as it takes for them to send them out. But there was also legislation that I'm not sure passed or not that was going to make all that information public. And that's the only way, if you wanted to do a thorough analysis and find all the wells that there were, you probably have to get the DWR well completion reports.
I'm sorry, if you don't mind. Sorry, do we know when the county began their permit system, the environmental health?
I suspect, I don't really know the answer to that. It's probably in the 70s.
Are there any other questions? Seeing none. Thank you, Bruce. I'll have public comment in a minute. Thank you, Bruce. Great presentation. And it's an eye-opening and a confusing one, but it's there. Thank you.
Fred, I know you must have questions.
Now we'll go to the public we'll go to the public for public comment. I have a speaker slip, Fred Koval.
Thanks. Some issues. I was on the AB 3030 committee 20 years ago. And yes, to answer Councilman Zimmerman's question, there was a basin study done. Alexander Brothers went out to every well in the Uplands Basin and took a water measurement height. And based on that, through some Fortran 77, a excellent basin contour was developed, 3D. And turned out the basin wasn't flat. The basin was a roller coaster like this, up to the river. From the mountains to the north, dipped down, and then came up to the river. And there was pockets of depression, obviously. The bigger pumpers had a cone. Okay, let's talk about the tribe's wells. Camp 4 goes into the reservation. They don't have to do anything. They're a federal entity. They can pump all they want. There won't be any teeth, any bulldog.
The California law says that the tribe can be members of the MSA.
Yeah, can be.
Can be. Don't have to be, it can be.
But, yeah, that's right. Well, I think we know the answer to that. Up in the Woodstock area, up in the mountains, as an example, and then along Baseline Road, there's a lot of, as mentioned, mutual water companies. They've got a major conflict called chromium-6. And what will be their solution, if any? No water. They may not have any. As to wells that we don't know about, Alexander Brothers back 20 years ago, there's a myriad of them everywhere in this valley for one reason or another. Now, how about what really bothers me? We have all these riparian pumpers up and down the river, both sides of Lake Cachuma, all the way to Lompoc. I don't know if any of them have meters, and I don't know why it's not being enforced. And will it under this act? And how soon? As far as this GSA goes, boy, I'd sure like to see one power, one JPA. This thing is going to get mired down. Everybody's ox is going to get gored. And I don't see a simple solution for many years to go. I'm frightened by what's going to happen here because in AB 3030 for 2 years I sat there and I watched the lawyers just cut us to little tiny pieces. And what was an overdraft during AB 3030 became a, we don't know if the basin is overdrafted or underdrafted. That's how it turned out. It became pablum. And it disappeared from the face of the earth. Nothing ever happened. Of course, there was no enforcement either. It was, hey, will you guys please do this? Never happened. So I'm really worried about the tribe. They have full control, especially the Uplands Basin. And we have no recourse. Okay.
Yes, please, Bruce. Thank you, Fred.
Oh, and I have one last thing after Bruce's.
All right. Number of different things. I do recall there are studies from the 40s that had contours, and I'd forgotten, but there were some contours drawn during the AB 3030 exercise 20 years ago. And generally, what comes out of that exercise is that the southwest area is more pumped than the rest of it. That's one of the reasons ID1 was formed, remember. 20 years ago, no one had a good handle on what went on in the so-called white area. I think there's more pumping out there now than there was back then, but nobody's ever quantified it. So that's the first thing. Second thing relates to federal installations like Vandenberg Air Force Base, tribal lands, the penitentiary down in Lompoc. There's a concept called Federal Reserve water rights. It applies to all of those entities. And theoretically and historically, it applied to surface water along and underflow along rivers, not uplands. However, due, I believe, to some lobbying in Sacramento during the development of this new act, the act states that that federal entities can apply Federal Reserve water rights to uplands groundwater in addition to river flow. Now, to the Chumash Reservation, it is in that same complex area as Solvang. If you're interested in learning about it, there's a good write-up of the hydrogeology and the Chumash Hotel expansion environmental document. It documents the 4 wells they have and what they produce and what they penetrate. However, all this applies to federal entities and federal lands. And I guess we believe that when it comes to Camp 4, it's county land basically owned by a tribe. It's not federal land, and until it becomes federal land, they cannot apply Federal Reserve water rights out there. That would be our reading on that. And they can play or they cannot play. So,
Thank you.
What about the forest? What about the forest? Los Padres?
there's ever so little nubbin of area where the forest is over the groundwater basin. So it's essentially a non-player, because if you draw the lines in terms of where the forest is, as I recall, there's a little triangle right up here, like on the scale of my finger, and then right in here there was a little bit. And that was about it. I don't think they're a substantial player.
Fred, did you want to continue?
Yeah, very short.
Stand by, Bruce. AB 3030, one thing was pointed out, and that's why you see at Nielsen's grocery store overflow, but all the way down El Potato Creek, mostly underflow. And the reason for this is there's a crack in the basin, and it's right at the post office in Los Olivos. There's a hotel next door that has, on the corner, that has an elevator, and it's got a hole in the ground, so the elevator can go down to the first floor. That elevator, the water flowed right out of the top of it and into the gutter for years, until they put in a lot of concrete to stop it from flowing. But it's still cracked there, and that's why you see underflow and overflow in the El Potato Creek. The same for the Santa Aguida Creek, underflow and overflow. A lesser crack. There's a third one out by where the Santa Ynez River, and I forget the name of that creek there, underflow there. Again, a third crack in the basin. The hydrologists, we had 5 of them at AB 3030, and they all agreed there's 3 cracks in the Uplands Basin. And that's where the river gets replenished with underflow. Fact.
Thank you. I have no other speaker slips. Anyone else wish to comment? Ken?
We'll withdraw my request.
Oh, thank you. Is there anyone else?
No, it's real informative to me. One thing that kind of caught my attention.
Come to the mic, please.
Yeah, Brad Jost, I'm with ID1. One thing that caught my attention is the complexity, and then the governorship of this, and everyone being involved. You know how when eyes come up, we got to work together on. Okay, you got that part. The one part, there's going to be I saw taxation possibly associated with this. Could you a taxation and a cost to manage this? How's this going to be related to the users? This is one of my big things I always follow. Can you explain any on that?
How it's going to get paid for.
Right, and the state doesn't do anything without, you create an agency, it's going to cost us taxpayers huge amounts. I can just see it. And what have you heard so far?
Well, right now, to fund the preliminary activities, we're doing it with the funds derived from the fees that people currently pay. But once a GSA is formed, consisting of a number of different agencies, and serious studies get underway, then there's going to be more costs, and the GSA is going to have to figure out how to allocate those costs. And then this district's going to have to determine what the relationship is between the fees we collect in the uplands and the fees that the GSA collects. So that there's lots of little things out there that need to get resolved. I don't see the cash flow escalating dramatically until after the GSA is formed and all the studies have to begin. because I think a lot of it, of the liaison to form GSAs is gonna be internal staff time. And that's gonna cost the entities that do it internal costs, but not necessarily external costs.
Yeah, I appreciate his statement, but I think in big term it's gonna cost us. So we need to really watch this and to come up, whether we're in multiple agencies, multiple GSAs, how we do it, we have to look at cost effectiveness. That's gonna be real important. Cause I'm sitting here and I watch you poor guys get pounded on, the rates. And I get it too at my end.
Right.
So that's why we gotta really look at all these avenues but municipalities can have members on those boards, right? And it's almost like mandatory that they're on there, or?
Well, I think every purveyor is gonna want to participate.
Yeah, I think
And
definitely.
Even if they don't, they're gonna wind up getting subject to a fee.
Right. So we gotta be proactive on this thing and it covers, so if the map was up, covers a big area. So we really need to get all the players involved early, probably what you'd recommend, since you know more about than I know. I can tell you that right now. But anyway, that's my 2 bits.
Thank
We
you.
just need to work together on this one.
Bruce, you talked about the single plan, one GSA, multiple plans, multiple GSAs. What is the headache about a single plan on one GSA? Is there you said that wasn't a wise thing to do.
Because if you have one plan, first of all, any part of the basin doesn't meet the various criteria, like forming a GSA to begin with, doing a sustainable plan, or getting a sustainable plan that DWR and the state board will accept. If one part of the basin fails, the whole basin fails. But if Lompoc and Buellton wrote sustainable plans that were acceptable, and even if the district's southwest portion of the San Ynez Uplands wrote a reasonable plan, it's possible that the outside area might be the only probationary area. That's why I think that one provision is golden, because you want to move each segment along and not let the areas with problems drag down the whole area.
Well, in that case of multiple plans, multiple GSAs, then you should have a MOU between the GSAs so that everything can be coordinated? Is that what you're trying to say?
The entities that form the GSA will have a JPA or an MOU.
Right.
And then if there's 3 of those, say, they're going to have to coordinate using the same technical methods, the same criteria, and presumably showing even then that the overall basin is sustainable. But if part of it isn't and they're not playing, the others won't be held back.
Could that be formed with it as the multiple GSAs be formed together as a JPA or an MOU to control them all?
Yeah, and it'll be a new entity.
Yeah, be a new entity, right.
Be a new entity consisting of, in this area, it
could be three GSAs.
There are, for example, you have to take into account the entity that does the, before I go there, the city controls both its water and its land use. Districts only control the water, they don't control the land use. So the county gets to play with water where there aren't any water purveyors, but they get to play with land use everywhere except where there's a city. So it's going to not only be the county, it's going to be the two-headed county consisting of the water agency and the planning department. And so the partnership I see in the uplands would consist of the county, the San Ynez District ID1, Solvang, likely at least one seat for all the mutual water companies combined. And I live in one of those areas where there is a mutual water company. And if I had more time, I'd be I tried once actually already to form a more close-knit group to come up with some collective action relative to Chrome 6. But again, everybody's got their unique circumstances, and some people got just under the 10 parts per billion, and other people didn't have it at all, and some people had really high concentrations, and everybody looks to their own solution, all of which are expensive.
You're correct about the county controlling the land use, but ID1 controls whether or not there will be can and will serve, so that's kind of a way of controlling land use of areas in ID1. Because if you might have a legal lot to build a house, but they will not serve you water. Therefore, you cannot build the house.
Well, there's an interesting interplay there, but the intent of this law is to make those things operate together, because in the past, they always haven't.
We still don't.
Thank you, Bruce, very much. Great presentation. If there's no other comments, we'll go on to the next item. So there's no action required. Sorry? We want to take a little break.
Sure.
About 10 minutes, come back at 8:30. Yahoo. Okay, got it, okay. We're back in session, item number 8.
Item 8, California Employers Retiree Benefit Trusts, served other post-employment benefits liability presentation.
Staff report?
Good evening, council members, mayor. Sandra Featherston, your Administrative Services Director. The city currently provides what we call other post-employment benefits for its past, present, and future retirees, and it includes medical, dental, and life insurance. Dental and life insurance were offered to those employees that were retired prior to 2010. Since that's changed. New retirees are not receiving dental and life insurance. We have historically chosen to pay our OPEB, for short, as we go. So as we get a bill for the retirees' insurance, we pay that bill. However, with some of the new requirements and accounting for those things, by paying them as they come due, and instead of paying them as they earn them, if you consider, like, as an employee, I've earned these benefits after working so many years, instead of paying it based on when someone earns it and you only pay at the time they need it, then you continually develop with their client this unfunded liability. So we have an actuary that did evaluation for us as of July 1, 2014, and they've determined that the cost of our unfunded OPEB liability is about $2.4 million. At a council meeting held on September 8th back in 2014, CalPERS came and presented information regarding their Retiree Benefit Trust, or the CERT. It's a trust that's specifically set up for the purpose of receiving employer contributions that will pre-fund OPEB. So by doing this, it allows us to put money in ahead of time that will earn interest, and over time will help us reduce the amount of our unfunded liability, but also by using the interest earned on the monies, it helps compounding, and then we can use some of that money to prepay some of our expenses. We've decided to go with the CERP trust offered by CalPERS because they have a very low expense rate, which I'll discuss, as well as being part of the CalPERS system, and they're already managing our pensions. They offer some different strategies for asset allocation, and those are listed in the table here identified. They have strategy 1, 2, or 3, and the expected rate of return is identified. As you might imagine, with a higher level of return of strategy 1 of 7.28%, it's a little more riskier portfolio versus strategy 3, which an expected return of 6.12%, maybe not as risky because they're not investing as much in stocks, et cetera, but more in other safer investments. So, I know. But they identify in the second slide the CERP asset target allocations, how they invest each strategy. So you can see there, for example, in equities, in strategy 1, they're investing 57% versus strategy 3 at 24%. So that just gives you a little summary of how they're investing their funds. And so for the council, we're recommending that we move forward with an election to enter into the CERP trust. It allows us to, we can make a minimum contribution, we can make no contribution, but the money then allows us to say that we've put money specifically aside for this unfunded liability. Whereas right now in our financials, if you look at it, we've designated some money for OPEB, but it's not considered fully committed until it moves into the trust. The fees for the CERP trust by CalPERS represent about 0.10% of the assets that are held, and those fees can range anywhere from 0.15% to 0.02%, and that just sort of varies year to year. What we'd like to do is have the council approve the recommendation to enter the trust, and then accept the recommendation to enter in the amount that's currently been designated on our financials of $248,418, plus the amount of what's considered our annual required contribution. This is the amount the city would have to put away every single year in order to finally get to that point where we would fully fund our OPEB costs. In this year's budget, we allocated $59,209. So what we'd like to do is once we have to go back and get another valuation. So CalPERS requires that we have a more updated valuation of what our actual liability is. And once the actuary. Once the actuary goes in and does the next valuation, he'll know that we're planning to enter into the trust, how much money we're planning to initially fund it, and that could change our overall liability actually and bring it down, because it's going to be expected to get a higher rate of return, where the valuation that was done earlier was a 4.75%. Now he can do the valuation expecting maybe, whatever strategy we choose, but a minimum of 6% return. So overall, our liability will actually come down and look better on our financials. We'll have money put into the trust and then earning interest that we can then use to pay and pre-fund those benefits. We will need, as I mentioned, to get a new valuation, and that cost we expect to be about $2,900. And then the other financial impact is really the administrative expenses. If we put in the $402,000, our cost for the year would be about $402. And I have Alyssa Perry and John Svidensky here from CalPERS, and they can go into any additional questions you might have about the different strategies. As I mentioned, we're recommending strategy 2. It's not too conservative, but yet not the most aggressive, as well as, since its inception in 2011, has come in the closest to its expected return rate. So that's why staff's recommending that option. But I will introduce them to come in, and John, if you want to come up and answer any questions about the trust options.
Good evening. Are there any questions first? Have you got any comments?
No, I think Sandra explained the situation to you quite clearly. It's certainly could be an advantage to the city to start pre-funding their OPEB liabilities, especially when looking a couple of years down the road at the changes to the accounting standards, which will be much like GASB 68, which you heard about earlier, and the recognition of your entire net OPEB liability on your balance sheet. So it'd be a good thing, fiscally speaking, to start putting money towards that unfunded liability and minimize the impact of those accounting standards as you look down the road a little bit.
Once we get into the program, is there any way we can back out of it, or we're into it till the bitter end?
No, sir. You're able to terminate at will.
Oh, okay.
So the only thing that we would require, considering we are a GASB compliant trust, as well as compliant with Internal Revenue Code, would be, as long as there are assets in the account, they would have to be transferred to another GASB compliant trust. We couldn't just refund you those assets since it's an irrevocable trust.
It could be continuing to be paid down, though, instead of retrieving.
Absolutely. You could stop making contributions at any time because they're completely voluntary. Yes, sir.
I have a question on the fund. The global real estate, what country are you exposed to?
Well, the global real estate encompasses a great amount of the globe. The diversification of the CalPERS portfolios are extensive. I don't have the list of countries with me here today. I could certainly provide a list using our annual investment report, but it's in the thousands and thousands of holdings, not just countries, but obviously stocks and bonds, et cetera, but it's extensive. Right. Now, one thing I'd like to point out is they are a real estate investment trust. We only invest in the OPEB trust and public market securities. So unlike the pension fund, who actually goes into the private market securities and buys and sells individual pieces of property, we don't do that in the OPEB trust.
Gotcha.
So in that particular case, it's basically the equivalent of a mutual fund is what you're doing. The
fund of funds, if you might, yes, sir.
So you give the thing, and then you actually, there's another set of managers who take a look at the day-to-day market and move the funds around from.
Yes, sir, and it's unitized, so you would only own units of the funds as opposed to owning the actual stocks. Right.
Is there a downside?
Well, certainly there's a downside. It is the investment market, so it doesn't come without risk of losing assets. Apart from that, not much.
What's been the record?
A record in what?
In these funds, holding up? Are they?
Well, I will share with you that we opened the trust at probably the worst possible time that we could start a trust fund in hindsight. So we opened for business in March of 2007 and promptly took on probably 10 to 12 straight quarters of losses. Now, the interesting thing was that even though we were losing as much as maybe 25% in a fiscal year, the trust fund continued to grow based on the commitment employers were making to actually fund this sort of a plan. So the progress of the trust from an asset growth has been very consistent and maintained through the almost 9 years that we've had. Now, we reached a high of right around 4.6 billion. This current fiscal year, it slipped a little bit. I think we're managing right about 4.5 billion right now.
Is there anything on the short side that you guys have built in? Did you guys play the downside of the market?
Well, we're not market timers at CalPERS, so I don't know that
Okay.
our investment office would really consider that to
Right.
be
Just a
a
question.
strategy per se.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. We'll take it to the public for comment, or is there any public comment on this item? Fred, it's your turn again. We'll bring it back to the council for discussion and action.
I'm going to make just one comment. Is that it's amazing that in our eligible retirees of a total of 16, that 25% of that falls into 80 and above. We have
Age?
For age-wise, we had one in the 80 to 84 category, two in the 85 to 89 category, and one 90 and above category.
That's what you call an actuarial loss.
Yes. So yes, that to me, that is really, and if you go start at 70 and above, it's, 50% of the, over 50% of the retirees fall into that. Actually, if you go to 75, it's about 50% of the people fall into that. So, damn, these people, these Danes live long, don't they? But that was my only comment in regards
Well,
to
if
that.
there are no other comments, can we have a motion with the staff recommendation?
I'll move.
Actually, we need, there is an option here. We need you to choose strategy 1, 2, or 3.
Ah,
I'll make the motion that we go with staff recommendation using strategy 2.
I'll second that.
it's been moved and seconded. We call the roll, please, Lisa.
Councilmember Deuce,
Yes.
Skit,
Yes.
Jameson,
Yes.
Zimmerman,
Yes.
Mayor Richardson.
Yes. That's with a pass at a 5-0. What else is on the agenda? Council member reports. We have one. Mr. Deuce.
Yes, we do. We met with the tribe February 3rd. And I know I didn't get back to you, Brad. Did Jim?
Lisa did.
Lisa
And
did.
we-
Oh, okay. That's why we brought Lisa. So, yeah, what has happened with the fire station is that the truck shrank. We're not getting a tractor. We're not getting a tractor trailer anymore with a tiller. We're getting just a straight chassis now. So all we have to do is bump out the front. If we use our station, we just have to bump out the front a little bit. And hopefully it fits in the door since the tiller doesn't stick up.
Now, we did actually confer with the fire department, and they would prefer we pop out the back, just because they like to do their daily checks out front, so they wouldn't want to take that. So that's actually what we're talking to the architect about, is popping out the back as opposed to the front.
Yeah.
Is that going to have, is there a number that you've come up with as the cost?
That's what we're asking the architect. We needed to confirm how much room they needed, to be able to walk around the truck and things like that. And we got that today, and so Lisa will be pursuing that with the architect.
Roy, we can't vote on this, but can we talk about our impressions and recommendations that we might have?
Yes.
Okay, well, one of the things that came out of it was that, out of the meeting was that the tribe would like some participation from us, whether it's monetarily or in kind.
Okay, we're giving them the land.
I also think that the county should be participating. They're the ones that are getting the sweet deal out of it all. They're paying $1 a year for the station here. They ran off with the perfectly good aerial equipment that was there 10 years ago. I would, in regardless of what Peter Adams says, I really think that the county should be participating along with us.
I think that Hans and I agree that our participation should not be one of cash or dollars, in like contribution, in the sense of probably through the demolition portion of the construction. Also, and allow the tribe and the county to pony up the balance of the construction. Not knowing what those numbers are, we can only guess that they'll be able to afford it. And then there was that issue of the possible donation from a trust that if we can control that, maybe we could include that also in the funding of the reconstruction.
Yeah, I'm still pursuing that option.
Okay. So that will be on the agenda next meeting, and we'll ask the council to decide what kind of a contribution they'd like to make in the reconstruction of the fire station. And by that time, we expect to have numbers so we can make an intelligent decision.
Well, we would continue to be responsible for the maintenance once it's built.
It'll be the county, just like they are now.
No, we are responsible.
Well, we're
for
responsible for the exterior. I mean, you
Outside.
could modify the terms of the lease to, at that point. Obviously, that was.
Well, maybe
with the
that could be
current building.
our contribution, is to continue
Those are
the
all-
maintenance
those are all
of the building.
factors, yeah.
Brad, just one question. If we go back, do we get back into the drainage problem?
No, because there's not going to be a door back there. I mean, there won't be a exit door. So we're only talking about going, I think, 6 or 8 feet, and that's what we had initially. So that would still work.
Okay.
A member of the audience asked if they might speak. Is it appropriate at this time?
That would be up to the mayor. This is not an action item, so it's not legally mandated, but I don't run the meeting.
Okay.
How does it affect our contract with the county? Does it affect it in any way?
We're not
based
under
on
contract.
Yeah,
We're
we
in the
don't have a
district.
contract with the county. We just have the lease that they use our facility. So yeah, we're annexed into the county, so we're part of their district, so they provide the service. Now, the tribe is going to fund, starting in March of this year, they'll have a paramedic up there that'll be in their contract, with the Chumash contract with the county. Now, we don't pay cash out to the county. They reimburse us for partial utilities for upstairs, and then the $1 a month rent.
Okay, and so it's just the one paramedic, that's all? That's needed extra?
Well, it becomes person shift 24/7. Yeah, it's three personnel years, if you will.
Yeah, okay.
Fred?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but at the last meeting when you discussed this, it was pretty cut and dry, no participation by the city for anything. It was clean, it was all on the tribe's back. And yes, you would take care of the exterior. That was the extent of it.
That's what we were going to ask for.
That's correct.
I mean, you guys.
Well, we also had a discussion with the tribe on our ad hoc committee and agreed to discuss that aspect of it again.
I feel creep.
Okay. You
I
certainly
know there's
don't look creepy, Fred.
I got another quick question. Brad, so
Fred, we just brought back information that the tribe gave to us. We could not we couldn't just table this. We had to tell,
Last meeting's item
we
was
have
to
to tell
give you
what we,
direction.
what we heard.
Yeah.
So is the county, do they get extra like property taxes, or is that how they get paid? Because there's some kind of
50% of our
their
property
service.
tax.
Y-
would go to
Yeah,
fire
we,
district.
we gave a portion of our property tax
Right, okay.
initially.
Okay.
Yeah, it was about 49%. So
Yeah.
that shift has changed, is complete. So they get 49% of what we got.
Okay,
at
do you
the time
think,
we
do you think if the county gets more involved in this, I mean, I guess regardless, because we'll have another asset there, which would be the truck, are they gonna increase any kind of,
We won't have the asset. The county will own the truck, operate and maintain it.
It'll be contribution by the tribe. They'll
Gotcha.
just have to do maintenance
right, yeah.
on the truck, so. So that's the report from the ad hoc committee on the tribe. Is there any other discussions? With that,
You want me to make a comment on the North County Sub-Regional Committee?
oh, yes, yeah, sure.
While Mayor Richardson was having the meeting with the tribe on the fire station, he requested that I go to the SBK Northern Regional Subcommittee, and the major discussion on that one there was continuing funding for the Saturday bus service between Santa Barbara and the San Ynez Valley. And they came up that the ridership right now has not been what they had anticipated, and they were running a loss, but they wanted to continue the project. They are going to, they voted to continue funding with a $14,000 supplement to keep the service in, continuing through the end of this fiscal year. They are planning to continue it for another 2 years because they want to have a 3-year trial to see if it is. But they are planning to go out and do a far more vigorous advertising to get the ridership up. There's been a number of occasions where right now the average ridership is about 3.5 people per bus going back and forth. They've had a high of 26 people per bus, low of 0. They are looking at maybe going to a slightly smaller bus that has become available, but they do want to continue it, and they are going to start pressing more advertising both in the valley so the local residents know that there is a bus service to and from Santa Barbara on Saturdays. And they're also discussing going to make outreach to the various visitors bureaus to let them know flyers to go out to the various hotels both in Santa Barbara and the San Ynez Valley that the service is available. One thing they're really looking at is to try to get people from Santa Barbara up here that are looking for day trips out of Santa Barbara. So that is what they're working on. They are going to be continuing through the end of this fiscal year, and they are planning to maintain it for at least next year, trying to build up ridership to have a long-term improvement on the ridership.
The positive portion of that is that the riders that use the service have nothing but excellent praises. They love the service, they love the accessibility, and the people that come from Santa Barbara have said that, if we'd known that, we would maybe, if you could go back on Sunday, we would rent a room and stay over the night because we just haven't got enough time to see it all. So it's all positive, but just the word's got to get out. The Visitors Bureau has agreed to help fund the extension of time. The county, I believe, is underscoring the whole thing, isn't it? The extension, yeah. But the SCVB is positive, gets positive vibes on it, and they want to see it continue running, and they'll, at one point in time, if necessary, they'll subsidize some of that. Are there any other comments? Seeing none, then we are adjourned.